Hi, I'm James McGuire, and today we're talking about NetDevOps, certainly a technology that's going to play a key role in enterprise IT in the years ahead. To discuss that, I'm joined by three experts on the topic. With me is Meredith Rose, Senior Consulting System Engineer at Worldwide Technology. Meredith, good to have you with us today.
Thanks, James. Looking forward to talking about this exciting new, transformation in our industry.
Great. Also with me is Joel King, NetDevOps Software Development Strategy Lead at Worldwide Technology. Joel, hello to you.
Hey, thanks, James. Thanks for allowing us to have the opportunity to talk with you today about this subject. It's something that we work with on a daily basis.
Absolutely. And rounding out our panel is Tim Hull, Solutions Architect at Worldwide Technology. Tim, welcome aboard.
James, thank you. It's nice to be here today. NetDevOps is dominating most of our conversations these days, so we look forward to speaking with you about it.
Interesting. Okay, it's really gotten big. Well, let's set some groundworks for NetDevOps. I mean, obviously, the term DevOps may be a more popular term. We hear about NetDevOps. So what is it, and why do companies need it? Joel, what is your take on that?
Well, yeah, it's good to have the terminology defined up front. We look at NetDevOps, and I like to use that term. Some people refer to it as Super NetOps or NetOps 2.0, other names for that same concept. But it's really about applying DevOps principles to network operations, network programmability. And it's not so much about technology as it is people and process and how you change your organizational structure in your operations groups to be able to apply these DevOps principles. And DevOps comes from the Toyota production system. We talk about DevOps the three ways: the principles of flow, the ability to deliver value. So in a network operations standpoint, we're delivering value by configuring VLANs or bringing up new branch sites and so on. So that's an important aspect of it. Second way of DevOps is the feedback loop, being able to fail fast and to make small changes more quickly. And then the third aspect of it is continuous learning and experimentation, which really goes into that organizational and cultural aspect of it. How do you have an environment that encourages innovation and encourages discovering new ways of doing things? So if we take those traditional DevOps concepts and work to apply those to network and infrastructure operations, that's what we call and term NetDevOps.
Well, I mean, is it thought of as emerging technology, or is it really mainstream at this point? I mean, or is it still on its way to being mainstream, Joel?
Well, we have some people that are more forward and more advanced, and then there's a lot of customers that are very immature and on that journey. So it's right across the board, and again, it's an organizational issue more than technology.
Well, certainly, and this is one other side point I think it might be interesting. The term NetDevOps means that people from different teams are going to be communicating with each other. There's going to be less silos going on. Is that a key idea before we leave this intro?
Well, we do, and that's one of the challenges, because many large network operations are very siloed. You have, security engineers, you'll have the storage engineers, you'll have the compute engineers, the network engineers, load balancing engineers, and it's important that they all work together more closely, in addition with someone that has programming skills. And that's an important aspect that we counsel our customers. How do you bring in that person that is a software developer and get them to work with a broader team so that everyone knows where they fit into this value stream or this value proposition?
Interesting. So I know the three of you come from pretty different backgrounds to be in your current position. I think it might help people to understand the market to talk about your various backgrounds, how you ended up where you are now. Meredith, why don't you give us the rundown?
Yeah, sure. I've been a network engineer, I guess, traditional for about 25 years. So been doing that for a long time, and just been on traditional kind of routing, switching, a little bit of load balancing, other things, starting out, those box by box configuration with the console port on the laptop. As networks have, scaled to the massive size that we see today in our traditional enterprise environments, it's just become a scalability problem. You can't have one person go to make these changes box by box manually anymore. It's just not efficient.
Right.
So as I saw that need kind of evolving, and then I was kind of following along with some of the programs, the DevNet and other things, seeing that the interaction between teams that write programs and the hardware manufacturers opening up APIs and things to program their equipment. And then the last piece was the network engineers really needed to skill up and figure out, how do I change my skill set and my capability to fit into that scalability model, which means learning to do some coding and learning how to interact with those same pieces of equipment, routers, switches, whether it's just doing discovery or doing programming of networks or monitoring, troubleshooting. A lot of it has to do with provisioning and things like that. And instead of doing the slow manual process and being the bottleneck, we want to be the facilitator to get this network up and running, functioning, healthy, and kind of really more agile and nimble and able to evolve. If it needs to be a change in the network, we want to be able to bring that about quickly and not be the slowest piece of that chain. So that's where I sort of took it from my customer experience and customers saying, hey, when I want to bring up a new server, for example, I need to have the network port provisioned. I need to have it entered into the load balancing pool. I need the firewall configured appropriately. And rather than going to those siloed departments that you talked about and opening tickets one at a time and waiting for those respective engineers to make those changes, if we can develop a system so that becomes like open a ticket and all these things happen through automation and orchestration, that I think is the future to scalability. And so that's why I've kind of come from the, I guess, sort of grassroots of the customers saying, we really need this because it's too slow, it's too complicated, it's too siloed. And so trying to bridge those gaps together using the newer, as we've seen the manufacturers evolved and the engineers evolved and the needs evolved, kind of tying that all together with this has really been the winning combination. And I think has bring this set of skills to be really mandatory for any network engineer going forward.
Neat. Tim, what about yourself? What is your journey to your current position?
Yeah, well, it starts probably about like most everyone else in network operations. I worked in an operations role and dabbled a little bit in server operations, storage, spent a good number of years focused on voice over IP and video over IP, but really focused on how the network supports those real-time communication protocols. And I got into this candidly because I was scared that I could see my skill set becoming less and less relevant as time went on, as just interacting with our clients, the speed of demand, the volume of requests that I could see operations engineers under left me feeling like if I didn't understand programmability techniques, if I couldn't apply what I knew as an operations person to something a software developer could understand and use the techniques that help them prevent bad changes from being introduced into production environments, that I might not have a place anymore in this world. So
Wow.
I kind of dipped my toes in the waters of Cisco DevNet in 2019, and it opened my eyes to, okay, well, an old dog like me can learn some new tricks.
It's good that you changed and adapted. I think it's super important in terms of an IT career. Joel, yourself, how did you end up where you are in terms of a career journey?
Well, I'm probably a little different than my colleagues here. I started out as a programmer analyst, got involved in operations from a systems programming standpoint, both on IBM and Unix mainframes, and then got into networking when we were making that transition from bridge networks to routed networks, and when the whole industry was taking off, and then did a little stint as a storage engineer for a while, and then finally got back into software-defined networking with Worldwide as an investment in this technology. We were looking to do some research or some evaluation of software-defined networking about 8 years ago when it became a thing on the horizon. And so I've kind of made the full transition from, programmer analyst to systems engineering, networking and kind of back to putting it all together. So I'm fortunate to be at the right spot at the right time in many of these transitions.
Yeah, sometimes you have to wear more than one hat, to be sure. I'm curious about the customer side of it. I'm sure there's customers who come to the three of you and say, "Hey, we're trying to deploy NetDevOps. We're working on it, or we want to work on it, but maybe we're in the middle of it. We get a little stuck. We wish it was better." What sort of advice would you give to companies that want to optimize their use of NetDevOps? Meredith, what might you recommend?
We usually recommend starting with something that is a kind of low-hanging fruit. So start with an automated skill that everybody can kind of understand and there's a need for, something maybe like changing the time server or something like that on your routers and switches, something that would not be a fatal mistake if you did something wrong. Maybe change your secondary time server or something that's in the background. So you start out small, maybe with a small group of hosts. Having a lab is of course invaluable because we're talking about making changes at a massive scale. So start small, don't bite off more than you can chew. Skill up. There's so many great resources out there, many of them at little to no cost. So you just have to kind of harness your passion for learning these new skills, learn a little bit of programming languages, learn what the manufacturers are offering in terms of their APIs and the other ways you can interact with their products using software and programming and not necessarily just going to the command line interface and typing in those commands. So, we generally try to guide people towards, small, maybe scripts, maybe some Ansible, some basic Terraform stuff like that. Get familiar, get your feet wet, and then try it in a lab, and then try it maybe the small subset of your network equipment, and leverage your partners and your ability to get training from anywhere and everywhere that you can. I definitely did that. And just have to kind of try it out, I think, as you go in
Right.
controlled ways. But you got to make that leap at some point. A lot of this stuff is really little to no cost. It's just about your brain power and learning and skills that are most important, I think.
So start small. Tim, what do you say to people when companies come to you and say, "Hey, we're working with NetDevOps. We wish it were better." What advice do you give them?
James, I think there's a general acceptance in the industry, in all industries, that net DevOps is important. And there's an interest in doing more from every organization we work with. My advice is consistency beats intensity. You don't set a goal to get in shape on New Year's Day and consider yourself a failure by the end of February just because you're not in shape. Make small steps, do something, but you don't have to do it all at once. It is absolutely a journey that really has no destination. The destination is just stay on the journey, keep getting better every day, make those small steps that Meredith talked about, and build confidence both in the system and also allow the people that are supporting that system to build confidence as they acquire new skills.
Joe, what would you add in terms of advice for clients? I mean, how do we make our net DevOps better? We're struggling. What do you tell them?
Well, I think to follow on with what Tim said, I think allocating time and not allocating time one week out of the year and expecting that to come to fruition by the end of the year. For example, when I was studying for the CCIE exam, I would spend time every Friday practicing, learning how to do the different techniques, different configuration, and so on. And it was a very methodical thing. Every Friday, I took so many hours, did so many exercises to learn things, improve my skill. And I think that's very critically important with the whole concept of programming, software-defined networking, network programmability. You need to make a concerted effort to do it consistently and to build upon the skills that you have and learn new skills. And the amount of time that you allocate is an important aspect. And that's where I see a lot of customers failing is they don't realize how much time it takes to learn a lot of these techniques. And it's really a journey. It's not something that you can do once and done.
So net DevOps can be a challenging skill and challenging process to implement. Am I correct in thinking that?
Well, there's so many more tools available today, and there's so many foundational skills that you need to have a good grasp upon before you can build upon that. And some people don't realize that they need to have a good understanding of Git. They need to have some programming experience. They need to understand integrated development environments like VS Code or Sublime. They need to understand containers. So a network engineer in the past typically didn't use those tool sets. So generally it takes a fair amount of time to become proficient with the fundamentals before you can start advancing upon it. So that's one of the most important aspects of this, is being able to get to the point where you understand the fundamentals and then build upon that and build on it in incremental ways, as Meredith was speaking of.
Mm-hmm. So let's look to the future of NetDevOps. I'm going to guess it's only going to get bigger. In fact, it might even be almost an exponential growth curve. If we're looking several years ahead into the future, Tim, what do you see in terms of the future of NetDevOps, say in the year 2025? What will it look like, and how can companies get ready for it now?
Yeah, I think a couple of things to note. One, a younger generation of operations skilled people seem to have a background in programming. And I don't think that's necessarily the case with those of us that have been in the industry a long time. So even if they aren't skilled network operations people by trade or skilled programmers by trade, they probably know a little bit about both. And I think that sort of talent is something that can be developed into a skill set that really helps organizations accelerate what they want to do. And in terms of the people that are already in the industry, I think it's going to be mandatory. Just like you wouldn't expect somebody to graduate from college without knowing how to do a little bit of touch typing. It's going to be mandatory that they know some degree of programming techniques in order to help keep up with the speed of whatever their organization is demanding.
Meredith, what would you add in terms of looking to the future of NetDevOps, and what do you predict, and how can organizations get ready for it now, if possible?
Yeah, I agree with Tim. I think the networks are getting large and complicated. So things like consistency of configuration, speed of configuration, the time to deploy changes is going to be just absolutely mandatory that these things are done in an efficient, error-proof, as much as possible manner. So I think you're not going to really have access to the command line interface, if I had to make a prediction, of these devices, routers, and switches. It's not going to be a thing where you're going box by box and checking and making changes. I think everything will basically have some kind of controller. It's a little bit analogous to what we see with wireless networks today. You don't go to one access point, make a change, then go to the other one and make the same change, and then go to the third one and make the same change and do it 1,000 times. So we're still, as veteran network engineers, I think, a little reluctant to give up that control of getting into the box and making those changes by hand. But I think in the future, that will just kind of fade away, and it will all be about, as you're developing your networking skills, you're also developing your software programming skills, your ability to access these equipments using automation orchestration. And there's so many benefits to it. It's just a bit of a learning curve for those of us who didn't start out there. But like I said, like Tim said, in the future, that'll just be part of the training curriculum and learning as you're learning to be a network engineer or a security engineer or a collaboration engineer. That'll be an integral part of your skill set. And at this point, like for you, like me, we kind of have to go back and learn that, and then push forward in applying those things. But it will be, I think, a foundational skill, and it will be kind of the only way to program large networks in the future.
Interesting. Joel, what do you say if you're looking at your crystal ball several years out for the future of NetDevOps? What do you forecast?
I think that the important aspect of it is that organizational structure. Companies that don't evaluate how they operate their networks and change accordingly are going to be at a competitive disadvantage to those that do adopt these principles. Or as others said, the networks are becoming much larger in many cases, more geographically separated. I mean, we have projects where we're working with deployments of 800 racks of gear, wow. Extremely large amounts of equipment that's being put in very short time frames. And you come to the point where you can't do that manually anymore. You just cannot do that and be able to be accurate, consistent, and provide it in a timely manner. So I think the important aspect is evaluate your organization, what people's skills are in those organizations, develop a plan to be able to train them or upskill them where necessary, create teams that complement each other and complement those skills, and then constantly evaluate your processes and how you operate your networks. And that goes back to those DevOps principles to be able to apply that to day-to-day operations. If you don't do that, you'll be at a competitive disadvantage.
Clearly, I would say, yeah, no doubt about that last point for sure.
Yeah, I was just
Meredith,
thinking.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was thinking too with the evolution of cloud being so integral to most enterprises. You can't just walk into that data center and hook up and make a change, or may necessarily go into that firewall, load balancer, router switch, or whatever that equipment is. So you really become dependent on the software tools that you need to make those configuration changes. So it's kind of getting an integral part of our job, whether or not you're hosting your applications on-prem or in the cloud or a combination. So that's another thing I think is going to keep growing.
I think it's a really interesting point. So I think I sort of imagined everything we're talking about was at least somewhat related to cloud, but Meredith, can you bring that cloud piece in a little bit? How does that play a role in the technology?
Yeah, I mean, it's that, and also even data centers that are hosted by other companies, you don't have the old, just walk into the data center and make that change that you need to, or troubleshoot something using a crash cart and some cables. So we really are getting to the point where we don't really see or touch or feel the equipment that we're working on now. So the whole application, if it's in the cloud, you have to manage your routing, switching, load balancing, security, and other devices, other policies and configuration changes remotely and at scale. Again, that's really important to have the skills to do that in a way that you can do it in a controlled way, like Joel mentioned, using Git and things like that, keeping track of your configuration and change management, having golden templates, stuff like that is becoming so important, the consistency, and not necessarily doing that manually anymore with the scalability.
So is it a question of, if I listen to what you're saying earlier, maybe earlier in your career, you might have literally gone down from machine to machine, almost in a very hands-on manual way. And now you're working with the control panel, it's remote. And so it's almost a little removed. Am I correct in thinking that? Yeah,
exactly. Now we are using, either controllers or other ways to access an API, writing code, writing out the changes you wish to make using programming language, and writing in, things like checks and other things, checking for errors, making sure things were deployed correctly, and doing that all sort of offline in a way that you can kind of almost like check your work before you deploy things, and then check it again after it's deployed. So you really take out a lot of the they call them snowflake configurations. This router is maybe a little different than that router, and there's a little bit different rule sets, and that can lead to security issues or performance issues. So I think we're really going to evolve to that way, whether your stuff is in your own data center, a hosted data center, or in the cloud. I think it's all going to kind of migrate to that way. And that'll be important for us to have the skill sets to operate our networks in that manner.
Really interesting. Meredith, Tim, Joel, I think the three of you said it. I greatly appreciate you sharing expertise. I definitely learned something. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James.
Thanks for having us, James.
Thank you, James.